Alright, so I don't know if my brother's going to be joining me anytime soon, but I'm going to just make this as quick as possible anyway. So first and foremost, I had a comment on my YouTube channel with one of my most recent videos, that being a video called Apparently We Forgot, and it had to do with the image I was reacting to where the main crux of it was, apparently Christians forgot that Lucifer was an angel once thought beautiful by God, and then he was betrayed by God, and apparently the enemy of the story is God and not Satan. I gave answers on that, appropriate answers, or what I believe to be appropriate answers. It was supposed to be something simple. It wasn't supposed to be too over the top an explanation or rationale. It was meant to be a kind of like an easy, simple explanation discussion. Lo and behold, I had a commenter. And at first I was a little like wondering why the guy was just going off on me, but he ended up being a really nice dude. At the end of all his, criticisms and all that, and he blatantly disagreed with all my points, but at the end of it all, he wrote verbatim, quote, "Great video, though, for what you're trying to do. Keep it up, man. Sincerely, even though I may disagree with the points, I appreciate the effort and courage to make content and engage with the criticism." Unquote. So at this point I was trying to answer. He left like 8 different comments of like long paraphrase ends. And I was just trying my best to like type it all out, and at the end of it all I was like, this is just too much to type. So I ended up just typing on one of his messages or one of his comments and being like, hey, can I make a video response to this? It'd just be easier to address it, because you make a lot of good points that I actually do have some answers to. Keyword is some. I'm reading this all at the same time verbatim, so I don't even know everything of what he mentioned. I just know that he had a whole bunch of them, and I've seen some bits here and there, but and a general overall idea, I should be able to make up some answers on the fly. And he said, go ahead, rip it to shreds. The guy's very nice. He disagreed and even dropped me a sub at the end of it all. So you know what? I'm going to give him the chance, and I sincerely hope he's watching this right now. But, I'm trying to do this out of love, and I really hope that because there are some points within the first post he made that I know for a fact I have answers to. And a lot of this, some of the points that I did read into, for a little bit by bit, I know a lot of it is a good portion of misinformation. Misinformation, can't speak. So hopefully this will clear it up. If it doesn't end up changing your mind, good sir, well then I hope my efforts are seen and that we can at least agree to disagree at the end of it. But my effort here is just to hopefully clear some things up. And if it doesn't change your mind, it doesn't change your mind. But at least, we've seen each other's efforts on this, and you put out your ideas, and I can handle the criticism. My idea is to extend the love that I have been shown in my life, and hopefully that you can see this reflected from Christ into my end. So we're going to have our disagreements, I don't doubt that, but the whole idea is that we're able to engage, and that's kind of what I'm trying to do. So we'll start with this. It's a very small snippet, and this is kind of like the groundwork for what builds the rest. So, quote, "I'll start with, I'm a dirty non-believer that engages with the Bible on its narrative merits, not out of blind devotion to a faith," unquote. So allow me to quickly respond with, look at that. I too am a dirty hypocrite and a filthy lucrative creature that is literally covered in sin. I'm a hypocrite for sure. I know there's plenty of times I put my foot in my mouth, but hey, at least we have common ground, right? That's kind of the point of grace and mercy, something that we, are given as a result of our sinful nature. And we have that in common, so we can hopefully build from that. To engage with the Bible and its narrative merits. The thing, and I'll answer this in short and then elaborate as I go on, I have noticed, as I mentioned just a moment ago, there are some small parts that are just outright misinformation to a certain extent. So I'm hoping that I can clear this out. And I know this to be a fact because I covered the stuff that he's covering in my reading, so I know for a fact within context that I will most likely set that record straight, hopefully. If explained properly, that'll be completely on me, but yeah, you were supposed to judge the Bible on its merits. The thing is that you have to take everything in its proper context. There's a lot of different points that other people put out there that if they just simply read like 3 or 4, like I kid you not, maybe even on an extreme circumstance, like literally the one verse above, it'll give you the context for the verse in question. But they don't do that. They want to make it what they want to make it. And that leads to a lot of misinformation, and I hope that, again, that this is an effort to clear it up. I'm not saying that you, my good sir, if you're watching, that you did that, but I am saying that that happens on a majority of times, so let's see if we can clear some things up. And on the last note, not out of a blind devotion to a faith, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. We should not be doing this based on blind faith. And I know that a lot of people have their opinions on how the definition of faith works in the Christian belief. I'm going to tell you that the reality that I have witnessed in my time and what I know to be true. Faith is not something that could be just a blind devotion. It is not something that could be mindless devotion. It cannot remain idle and stupid. You have to engage. You have to educate yourself on this. There is a lot more of a deeper meaning when it goes into a whole bunch of stuff that seems to end at the surface. It goes beyond. And when it comes to the faith, you don't just stop at surface level. So you're absolutely right to not, you don't want to engage the Bible out of blind devotion to a faith. Absolutely correct. But the goal, my personal goal, is to kind of approach this in a way that a lot of people don't really word out in this way, but it makes sense. I want to introduce you as a relationship to the Father. I want to introduce you to God not as a religion. I want to introduce it to you as a relationship, because that is, at the end of the day, what it is. It is your personal relationship with God, whether it's the Father, the Son, or the Holy Spirit. It doesn't matter. You will have a relationship with it, because at the end of the day, that is what he wants from us. He doesn't want this pious devotion as a king to his subjects, like, bow before me. We'll do that automatically because we're in the presence of our Creator, but we will do it, and he will still view us as his sons, as his daughters, as his creation, in his image. He still sees us with a value above that of a servant. And that is what I want to share with you. And I hope that the idea comes across. So let's start with number one, because he's got a whole bunch of them, so this might be a long video. Okay, so narratively speaking is where he starts off. So, quote, and narratively speaking, God is the purpose Pharaoh hardened his heart 7 times, after each time telling the Hebrews they were free to go. God forced the Hebrews to remain slaves and brought desolation to the Egypts for going against their own judgment and doing what God commanded. So if the slaves wanted to leave and Pharaoh wanted them to go, but God forced the situation to remain as it is and even worsen, well, that makes him the source of malice and strife in Exodus, unquote. Not completely incorrect, but again, there are nitpicks. So, narratively speaking, you are right. God did harden Pharaoh's heart 7 times, and that's kind of a really odd number, but notice that you said 7. First off, there's a significance behind the number, and I'll go into that maybe other videos, but for right now, you just need to know that 7 is the number of perfection for God, so that's kind of a purpose right there. There's underlying purposes that go beyond surface level, which you would be right, it seems really harsh, but give me a minute. After each time telling the Hebrews they were free to go, and end of that sentence. So the reason that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. So before we even continue on the actual situation, we have to know one thing and one thing only. Pharaoh's heart was already hardened. He initially flat out refused to let the Hebrews go. Even after the first 3 initial plagues, that any reasonable man would be looking at him being like, wow, this guy is not kidding. He can pull through with his threats and has done so 3 times. I think we need to agree. And he did agree. You're right, because after the third time, he was probably like, oh, just let them go. But here's the thing. Understanding the circumstance behind it is also just as important. And the Pharaoh not only had his heart hardened the entire time, but there was a backstory that predated him. The Pharaoh, first off, in the Egyptian culture, was seen as the morning and the evening star. He was seen as a god among man. In fact, the pantheon of gods that we know, like Osiris, Ra, Anubis, all these other ones, he was the top. All of those gods dwarfed in comparison to supposedly him. If he wanted to literally say one day, day is night, night is day, it would have been law in the land of Egypt. He was essentially, and this is a big thing, he was basically acting as God made man. And that would be an atrocity in normal instances. So think about that for a minute before I continue. And as I continue, it goes to the idea, the reason why God hardened his heart, well, first off, he also murdered all the firstborn sons of the Israelites and put them into the bondage that they were put. And then from time after that, he would have initial waves of his soldiers going through, and when his soldiers failed, he would send midwives that would do the dirty work. And the midwives didn't pull through with all the dirty work, and were basically making the claims like, oh, the Israelite women they're just really quick. They're all quick. They just have their babies and they hide them away, and we don't get there in time. Like, they had hearts. Pharaoh didn't. Pharaoh was doing this over this wasn't just a one-time off deal. He was doing this consistently for generations to eliminate the supposed prophecy going around. If I recall correctly, there was a prophecy. I'll have to look into that a little bit more. So that's something on my end. I'm still reading into the Old Testament scripts when it comes to that, and I'll be looking back on a lot. But when he hardened his heart, you have to see it from a more a godly perspective on this instance. You see, he was giving the Pharaoh exactly what he craved, and there was a specific purpose for it. It wasn't done yet. For the perfect situation to come out of that, all 10 plagues needed to happen, with the final one breaking the ego of the one pretending to be God. He was a God made flesh, essentially. So what better way to teach him a lesson than to not only break the entire pantheon, but also to break the man claiming to be God, where initially, to keep that going, he had to harden the Pharaoh's heart. But it was also for the eyes of from the Israelites' perspective, they were ingrained for over 400 years that these are your gods. God was essentially breaking it into them like, no, these gods are they're nobodies. They have no power. From the Egyptians' perspectives, it's, oh my God, the Israelite God is actually really powerful and our gods are useless. They're not doing anything. What about Pharaoh? Pharaoh's still in charge. And then from, God's perspective, it's like, oh, that's all cute. So now again, coming from God's perspective, the man was pretending to be God. So what better way to break the man, the ego, than to essentially show him that he had no power? So all 10 plagues needed to happen. And on that journey, it was more along the lines of something akin to, no. You wanted to play this game. You're now playing it. You're going to continue playing it until I say you're done. Again, the man's claiming to be God. What else are you supposed to do? And finally, on the 10th plague, the death of the firstborns of all Egypt, which I know that you mentioned that a little bit later, just remember, the Pharaoh had been doing this for generations. It wasn't just a one-off thing of, oh, kill all the males in one fell swoop. No, this happened over time. He was doing this consistently to God's chosen people. Remember that, because that's going to be an important detail. So yes, he let them go. He said, oh, I'll let them go, and God hardened his heart. You're absolutely right. There was purpose behind it beyond just the normal thing. The guy was claiming to be a god. That's kind of one of the biggest reasons as to why this happened. Continuing from your next point, God forced the Hebrews to remain as slaves and brought desolations to the Egypts for going against their own judgment and doing what God commanded. So God forced the Hebrews. Yes, things need to happen for a time. He cannot break the system in which we are placed. He can break it according to his will, but he still has rules that he follows as the creator of the things. He set law and order, and thus the things that he put for our order and our benefit, he follows, because that's the system in which is literally there. Now, he has power over it, but to keep us in bondage, again, there was a purpose. These people needed to see, and they were very thick-headed as well. Like, honestly, it's ridiculous. Let me see. Going again, slaves, desolation of Egypt for going against their own judgment and doing what God commanded. Might have missed that part. Why does that sentence not make sense? It made sense the first time I read it. I'm going to power through because the rest of it will at least be a coherent argument. If the slaves wanted to leave and Pharaoh wanted them to go, but God forced the situation to remain as is and even worsen, there was a purpose behind it. That makes him the source of malice and strife in Exodus. Incorrect. He is not the source of it. The heart of Pharaoh was the reason that this happened. The evil of men was allowed to continue because evil is allowed to persist. He cannot break the system right now. There needed to be fulfillment, and the perfect way needed to happen. In order for the perfect way to happen, these things needed to transpire. we learn lessons from both the good or the bad, but at the end of the day, the plan is the plan, and the way that God has said it is perfect. He will not go beyond his own reason and his own purpose, and when he says, I am with you, you can take refuge in the fact that he is not lying, because there is consistent fact and backing up that when you seek him and call for him earnestly in your heart of hearts, he is there for you. So when you say he is the source of malice and strife in Exodus, you're right. But it's not surface level abuse. This is God, your creator, planning out the best course of action for everybody. Any strife and malice that came from the hearts of men committing evil was their own issue. It was them. They were the ones committing the evil. They were not inspired of God, and they were heartless. In fact, actually, to be quite honest, Pharaoh just wanted them to leave to let it stop. But the moment it stopped, yes, God hardened his heart a couple of times, but he was reigniting his old nature. The guy was a heartless individual that didn't care about and didn't even see the Israelites as people. So of course he was probably going to go back to it anyway. Look at what happened when the 10th plague happened. It was the worst of all things, and he still pursued them afterward. He was just going to chase them anyway. But it wouldn't have proven a thing, because God would have been like, oh, I'm only powerful like to 3. No, he broke them all. So keep that in mind. That came across as a little mean. I am sorry, I didn't mean that. I'm just on a roll. Next quote. Quote, I also believe that it was God that commanded them to become slaves in Egypt in the first place. The entire situation was his making, so who was being judged? Exodus wasn't judgment. It was an inept author jumping through hoops to manufacture drama. Unquote. That is actually correct! In a very weird, twisted sort of way, but it makes sense when you think about it in the grand scheme. First off, God is creator, not creation. And you're right. It seems like he's making something to manufacture a drama. That's the beauty of it. We take the example of Job and Peter, and even Judas for that matter. Unfortunately, his end was a little bit more gruesome. But let's take Peter for an instance. When he was talking with Jesus, and Jesus was like, Peter, Satan has asked to have you and to sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith will not fail you. He ended up betraying Jesus, and at the end of it, Jesus forgave him the 3 times he betrayed him. Even when Peter said, I won't betray you, you'll deny me 3 times before the rooster crows. The rooster crowed 3 times. He betrayed him 3 times. And then Jesus forgave him, showing that repentance is not beyond it. I would have forgiven you, and I will forgive you, because you are important to me. That was the matter of forgiveness, and that was the expression of faith, that your faith not fail you. That was the beautiful thing. And then take Job, for instance. It seems like a very cruel bet, but remember, his faith was strong, and it showed at the end of it a very beautiful situation that even through the cruelest of times, he still trusted God that there was a reason. Like, he didn't know what the reason is, and he wanted an explanation, but he remained faithful and still praised his name, saying, what have I done wrong, Lord? Just tell me what I've done wrong, so that I may amend for it. And even to the point where I will only ask that God justify this to me, pushing his faith to the uppermost limits as a rubber band. And when God came and confronted him and put him in his place, he repented of it. And it was the expression of faith, showing that I was wrong to ask of this. For, like, I am sitting in dust and ashes of repentance because I want your favor. And God blessed him abundantly because his faith flowed and exceeded the expectation. That was the point. Faith needs to be exercised just like anything else. Perfect faith with no testing is dull and boring. So in a way that this is essentially a divine drama. To believe that God commanded them to become slaves, no, he did not command them to be slaves. In fact, that was still, again, the heart of the Egyptians who had forgotten about Joseph. Yes, it was prone to happen because there were going to be generations that forgot about God, forgot about their previous heritage, and always do this. This is kind of an example of how time usually forgets about certain things and certain lessons need to be retaught. So when it comes to that, yes, you're right. God did put him in a good situation where they had to come out of the land of Canaan into the land of Egypt because the land was bad for them, and it put them in an elevated situation where the 12 tribes would be blessed beyond their wildest dreams and given the land that was promised them over in Canaan. Only that the Pharaoh forgot God and forgot Joseph, and essentially subjected the people of Israel as their slaves and took away their humanity. So no, God, in a weird way, may have set the stage for this to happen, but again, we are still to our own. He has to let us do our thing because love without choice cannot be love. And that's what he wants. He want people to recognize him for who he is, and that is more or less the grand explanation of everything. Love requires choice, and that's what he wants. He wants love returned. Love sent out from him needs to be returned, and he will not be made a mockery. And that was the point. So he did not command them strictly to be slaves in the first place. He did give them the land of Egypt, but there was again purpose to it. To make them a great nation. They were always his chosen people with a promise from Abraham. So he would always have been with them no matter what. Even in the times that he was hearing their cry, it was a matter of time. And when the proper time came, they would understand the trials and tribulations they went through, and God would bless them abundantly. And there's a lot more to that. The entire situation was a making so who was being judged. Well, the book of Exodus wasn't about judgment at all. Nothing was about judgment. Who was being judged? The Egyptian people, but it wasn't about... Exodus wasn't about judgment. Exodus was the establishment of the nation of Israel. From the people and the 12 tribes, the law, the beginning, and the foundations of what made the nation of Israel so unique and so powerful. They were his chosen people, and that is the purpose of Exodus, to show that they went through these trials and tribulations, and the things that they came up with in remembrance of how God blessed them abundantly from a time where darkness decided to take its path. Because here's the thing, darkness is allowed to have its thing. They're allowed to have its time. We are inherently evil. For God to make this entire situation possible, because he gives good the chance to thrive and allow his influence to come in when we call for him. But the same thing goes for evil, that evil is an inherent part of our nature in this world. So unfortunately, along with letting good have its time, evil must have its time too. It's an ebb and flow, that evil is going to constantly try and weasel its way in. But God is the ordainer of life and knows this is a drama to show where faith exemplifies. And that is the grand purpose. So when we see this, it's, again, like you said at the end of it, it's basically a drama, a divine drama for his entertainment, to show that faith can be exemplified in the most beautiful way, exercised in the most unique kind of way possible, how people can still do incredibly good things with just a matter of faith to bring them closer to God, and how beautiful that is. I don't know what S plus G is, so I'm just going to skip that, but you do continue on the next one because there's nothing more I could really cover on that. Quote, my argument simply is that if the U.S. Were to destroy 2 towns because a mob was trying to rape and kill a handful of diplomats, we'd be the bad guy. I don't believe that is morally righteous by what's best for God, but by what's best for humans. God is not good. Good is something God can do, but not what he is. Unquote. Okay. Allow me to quickly take that argument at face value. You're not wrong. If the U.S. did do that, then by all means, we would indeed be the bad guy. But the thing is that we're able to hold ourselves accountable as humanity. We are fundamentally human, and we can hold ourselves accountable as a result. And especially as a nation versus another nation, you're not wrong. They were committing wrongs, we committed another wrong, 2 wrongs don't make a right. At the end of the day, you're absolutely right. We would be the bad guy. But here's the thing. God cannot be held to the human standard. He is the creator, not creation. If he was not creator, then we would be able to hold him to our standard, because then in that instance, he would not be who he says he is, and we would be able to be like, oh, well, if he's not creator, then he's got to be creation. He literally has to be one or the other. But if we hold him to the standard of creation when he is creator, that creates a false narrative and a false argument and a very huge conflict of everything that he was teaching in his word. I've read the Bible enough from point to point to know that I've seen the things that God has done that would be deemed evil, sure. But when I look deeper into each narrative, there's a further explanation beyond just, oh, he's being a jerk. No, there was purpose behind it. Whenever he allowed other nations to be destroyed, well, first off, other nations were worshiping false idols, and there was even speculation through some biblical study that they had recovered old architecture from pre-flood that was given to them from fallen angels. Occultic practices that were so dark in nature that it corrupted the very flesh and spirit. Think about that for a second. A corruption of spirit. How deep does that need to be to happen? But that's what these nations were doing, and that is why God called for their destruction, because there was nothing that could be done for them like it was in the flood. The entire purpose of the flood was to wipe out an evil that had corrupted the very spirits of men and start from a more neutral beginning, I guess would be the best way to describe it. I could be wrong on the explanation, but that would be kind of one way to view it, and that would be the way that I would describe it. And it's just so hard to get into all these things, but let me get back on track. So when God asked Israel to destroy these nations, they were doing evil. That was their punishment. God had deemed judgment, and they were the tool. God is not just destroying people for no reason. And yeah, I understand there might be some gray areas like, oh, what about the children? He was telling them to kill children and kill innocent people. There is an argument to be made that children are covered under grace in both the Old and New Testaments. I can't make that argument because I am still studying, but I do heavily believe, at least before I can find the answer, that children are covered under grace. Anytime there seems to be a judgment call made for killing children by God's words, there seems to be a matter of grace for the children automatically, that they are covered. And it is basically God's judgment to take even the people that had sinned, take the life back. And he is a righteous judge that knows the heart of hearts. So he will not judge misaccordingly to the surface level. He will see the innermost parts. If they were truly as guilty as he says they are, then their destination was already known because it was a part of their destination already. Versus the children, who we deem innocent, you'd be right. If they were truly as innocent as we say and they are covered by grace, then we shouldn't worry about it. But God is a righteous judge, and he has a soft spot for children. So it is morally righteous by God's standard, because it's not just best for him, but it is best for us, because he puts value in us. If he didn't put value in us, then it wouldn't be best for us at all. And we would see that more abundantly, but we don't. He does a lot of things in our favor and blesses us abundantly. He doesn't have to waste a second of his day on us if he really didn't value us, but he does. And it would benefit God to do his thing, but he's very humble and selfless. But yes, there is some self-interest if you want to be technical, but he is a God that cares about the thing he creates. And I can make a couple of parallels, but I'll move on to that a little bit later. But God is good. He is good, and I can tell you from everything that I have witnessed and everything that I have read. I can be a personal testimony here, and whether or not you believe me, I sincerely hope that you do. But please base that I have read the words for what they are. I do not put my own meaning into them. I'm not lying. I benefit nothing from lying to anybody. I am telling you that I have both seen in the words, I have seen it in real life, I have bore witness to these things. I have seen the Spirit of God work, and I can tell you that if he was not good like he says he is, then he is a hypocrite, and there is no reason to worship him, and you would be right. But I have witnessed it firsthand in many accounts that I can't even begin to describe. He is fundamentally, has to be good, because if he is not, then his entire word in our faith is void in nothingness, and we can just put our hopes in nothing because we don't have anything we can trust. But I trust him because I have seen and witnessed it. I have seen the power of his Spirit. I have seen it work. It's blowing my mind how awesome it is to even see this. Like, when you have your eyes truly opened and seeing it for what it is and seeing it unfold, you can see it too. Everybody can see it too. It's just a matter of humbling yourself and sincerely calling out to God, open my eyes so that I may see. And I promise you, you will see things. In time, you will see them. We are subject to this system. So we have no choice but to abide by it. But he will show you. And that is a promise. If you don't believe him, believe me. It is a promise from me that I am not lying to you. You will see the goodness of God. It is something that he has to be, because he is fundamentally, from the base of his nature, good. He has to be. There's no way about it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. He has to be, because it is his nature. I'll end on that, because honestly, I think I went a little too far anyway. Moving on, quote, as for the flood, God apologized to Noah and created a rainbow as a covenant with Noah, and by man by extension, that he'll never do a flood again. This proves God is not perfect. God burned down the house, then brought us a beautiful ring and promised he'd never lose his temper like that again. But really, it's our fault, for it's an abusive one-sided relationship. The only morally correct way to wield unlimited power is not to wield it at all, unquote. Okay, gross misunderstanding. Heavy gross misunderstanding. God did not apologize to Noah, and that's a very small tidbit. I don't need to continue on that. He did not apologize. In fact, actually, he said, this is my promise to you, that I will not flood the earth again. The purpose of the flood was, again, to have a more neutral start. But I do believe that there's a more underlying lesson to learn here. A lot of people in modern day today believe that, oh, if God really wanted to solve the problem of evil, why wouldn't he just destroy evil right now? This was the prime opportunity to show it. Noah was the only one who found favor. Okay, assume that God is good for 2 seconds, and that he only wanted to keep that which was good. Noah was the only one out of billions of people that existed. He was the only one that he could find and spare, because they had no evil. He literally did the thing that people argue for, like, oh, why didn't he just destroy evil? He did that already. Look how well that worked out. We're now going back to square one, the reason why the flood happened. Which, by the way, the covenant with the rainbow, you're all correct, that he'll never flood the earth again. Totally correct. And that does not necessarily prove God is not perfect. God, and I like your little example. He burned down the house, brought us a beautiful ring, and said he'd never lose his temper like that again. But it's a very bad example, because first off, he didn't lose his temper with us. When the verse says that he is sorry he ever created man, people have actually looked into the original Hebrew translation. We got it wrong. It was not that he was sorry on the instance of, like, I'm sorry I ever made them. It was, I'm trying to be an actor here too, but it was more like it's driving at your heart, and he was like gripping his chest, probably metaphorically speaking, grabbing his chest just with the amount of pain and the tears in his eyes, like, I didn't want this for my creation made in my image. I didn't want this for them. I'm sorry that I created them, because now I have to do this. And when he found Noah, it was probably like the one shed tear where he was like, there is still hope. And there is a promise through his line that will lead to a further promise and the establishment of salvation. So you're right when you mention that he'll never flood the earth again, but it does prove God's perfection, because he already tried the option that we also argue for. But mankind was the one who brought it. And in fact, I mentioned this in a previous video before the one you mentioned on comments on, and it was that there is, I don't put a lot of stock in the Book of Enoch, because I've heard some things that do prove and both disprove against its legitimacy. Well, let's assume that it's true, because it talks about the times of before Noah. Supposedly, fallen angels were interceding with men, breeding with mankind, teaching them these dark arts, like witchcraft and Wicca and Satanism, and all these rituals that they do are child's play compared to what they were doing with mankind. Like, fundamentally twisted the spirits of men. They were so far beyond redemption, it was not even a joke. Like, you can't even imagine. Think about that. How far gone do you have to be for God to give up on you? And even then, it wasn't about giving up on mankind. It was, I have no choice, because they brought this upon themselves. We chose in the garden to sin and disobey his word, his warning. And that was big. We paid the consequences, because the only thing left for us is death. But we can find salvation through God, through his promise, and through the time before Jesus. He remembered his people and gave them the promise, I will remember you on the last day. And when Jesus came, I am the fulfillment of the law, that now you can come to God, that you no longer need the law, but salvation is now open to anyone who sincerely and truly seeks for me. And that's the thing here, is the promise, like, I will never flood the earth again. It was never about losing his temper. It was about him never needing to follow that solution again, because that was never a permanent solution. It was a remedy, and a remedy is not a cure. A remedy is a temporary solution. When you're poisoned, you don't give a remedy to cure the poison, you give the actual cure. And a remedy will bypass the poison and keep you alive long enough for the poison to not kill you as fast. But that was the thing. And then abusive one-sided relationship is a very huge inaccuracy. Again, if you want to hold him to a human standard, yes, it would be an abusive one-sided relationship. That's not the point. He is not creation, he is creator. He is not held to the same standards. His morally correct way, he is the one who made the law. He is the one who set the moral bounds for a lot of us. Do not murder, do not lie, do not steal, do not bear false witness, do not commit adultery, do not covet something that does not belong to you. These rules and establishments of our morals came from him. He was the one who said it. And even beforehand, you can sum up the entire law within Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, all within two basic commands. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. We already come pre-programmed to love ourselves. We don't need that. That's why the law didn't say anything about it. We already love ourselves because we care about our bodies, we care about our lives, we care about our spirits, we care about our health. But we don't love others enough because we can't connect with them on that way. But if we show love, we're able to connect the closest way through our spirit with the Holy Spirit in God to be the binding connection. And that's just the most important thing. He is able to wield this power, and he's able to wield it correctly. I promise you, again, this is not an abusive relationship. I see my Father, and all I see is love. Yes, there's discipline for those who follow him, and there's punishment. There's definitely punishment to those who outright reject him. But we're already on that path due to our own disobedience. The wages of sin is death. That was a warning. That is not condemning from God. That is him warning us, like, I want you to live. I want you to be with me. And that's the most important part of it. And I hope I didn't go too far off the explanation. I want to save some energy for this. I'm already 38 minutes past, so let's see if we can pick this up a little bit. Quote, since God is explicitly said to set up and execute these situations at his own will, how can he pass judgment? That's like passing judgment on an actor for playing a villain in a play in which you wrote the script and casted him in that role. If the actor does what the director instructs and the director despises his creation, that's on the director, right? Unquote. Okay, so let me see if I can follow this, because this was the one that was confusing me a tad bit. So since God set up and execute this, how can he pass judgment? Because he's righteous. He's not going to miss trial. Here's the thing. Back in another video talking about Jeffrey Dahmer, I didn't really explicitly mention this, but here's the thing. Jeffrey Dahmer can lie in the eyes of men. In a jury of peers, we are coming to an educated decision like, oh, he committed these murders. We can't bat an eye at this. We have to pass a judgment. So we, the jury, find him guilty, and the result of it is either jail time or death penalty, in which case he got death penalty. And the thing is that before his end, supposedly he converted to Christianity and converted and accepted Lord and Jesus Christ as his Lord and Savior. He can fool man all he wants. He can on the surface level be like, oh, I'm so remorseful for what I did, and on the inside he could be like, it don't matter. God, I said the magic words. God's just going to forgive me. God is not fooled. If God is infinite, how are we? The literal verse goes, he breathed into man's nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. We possess a portion of God. You're telling me that an infinite being who knows everything, past, present, future, and can see through the hearts of men is going to mistrial when it belongs to him? He knows what we're capable of. Nothing is a surprise. So Jeffrey Dahmer over here, if he was faking it to mankind, is not going to fake it to God. And the same thing here. You said, how can he pass judgment? He can because he's righteous. Yes, he set this up again as a divine drama, but we ultimately bring the sinful nature upon ourselves. We have the choice of obedience or disobedience. When we were in the garden, he planted the trees and we were obedient. We never would have sinned if it weren't for the outside influence of sin and self-absorption and the fact of like, oh, God's holding back on us. If we just remembered obedience and trusted him, we would have remained eternal and infallible with God. We walked with him. But then we lost it because we disobeyed. We let our curiosity and our obsession with maybe God's lying to us. Maybe we can be gods. We were trying to be God. And we fell. And as a result, God's warning came to fruition. You will die, spiritually and physically, because you no longer have a presence with me. And that's one of the biggest important things. So you're right, that's a good analogy. I actually do like that a lot. I really do. Passing judgment on an actor for playing a villain in which you wrote the script and casted him. So you're right. And again, in an instance of putting him on the same level as man, you're absolutely right. But God is not held to the human standard, and you're right. This is a very good parallel. I do like it. But the difference is that the director, is still human. He's still able to, he can't pass equal judgment, and that would be more of a trapping situation. In fact, that, I don't really know how to actually argue this. I'll be 100% honest. I think I've already explained it anyway when you were talking about passing judgment and everything. It was a good parallel, I'll give you that. In fact, I'll admit defeat on this one right now if it means I can't give a proper explanation, but I sincerely liked that. Okay, now we come to the one that I think I explained before. Quote, also God commanded the Israelites to conquer their neighbors, even demanding them not to spare the children, to prove I am the Lord. Cute. He wanted his people to spread over the world, cleansing the planet of other ethnicities that would not convert, because his chosen people are inherently better than others simply by nature of their birthright. And God was the head and the cause of this? Unquote. Very gross misunderstanding, actually. I don't think I'm using gross in the right sense of the term, but let me try and power through and just give an answer. He did command the Israelites as a tool, as an extension of himself, to wipe out evil nations. As I explained earlier in the video, he commanded this because the evil nations were already condemned from that point of following evil nature. And it wasn't just about proving that he was the Lord. It was the land was promised to his people because of his promise through Abraham, and he was delivering. He is a God that keeps his promises. It was to prove it. It wasn't to prove that he is the Lord. There was nothing to prove to the nations that were doing evil. And it wasn't about his people spreading all over the world and cleansing the planet of other ethnicities that would not convert. It was never about converting. He knew their heart of hearts, and he knew. There was a reason that the story of Jonah exists. It shows that if there was really a true chance that he can bring people to him, he would give them the chance. But that's why he gave the judgment call to Jonah, who basically said, just do it. And he's like, no, you deliver the message first. There was a purpose, because Nineveh could be taken back. But these other nations, again, there was biblical record that a lot of these nations that they destroyed, which is why they were destroyed, were picking up from ancient artifacts from pre-flood, from idol worship and rituals and everything. They were corrupted. They needed to fundamentally be destroyed because they would be a corrupting influence in the future. And you could see that there were instances where people disobeyed and the people were cursed as a result, because that was the nature of the items there. And the Israelites needed to keep that evil away, because that would fundamentally stop the plan. And it can't happen because God is the plan. Really weird to put. It was never to, again, prove that he was the Lord. He could do that any way he wanted. He showed it numerous times. But he wanted his people not to spread all over the world, but to be given the promised land and to establish the nation, and vice versa. And it was never about cleansing ethnicities. He wants all to come to him. That is the purpose of the Gospels. Go into all the other nations and make disciples of all nations. It's not about the religion, it's about Christ. It's about God, your relationship with him. Introduce me to the world so that I may bring more to me. It's not just about my chosen people, it's about everyone. I want everyone that will come. And it's not that his inherent... Okay, I'm going to break that argument of his chosen people are inherently better. No. They were... God... Okay, you probably read this one too. In the book... I can't speak. In the book of Exodus, there mentions that God... And again, this was based on a bad English translation. It's not that he was actually going to do evil, but God sought evil against his people, namely that he was going to, he was angry with them because they were worshiping a false idol, even though he gave them the core 10 commandments and said, I will destroy, this was a test of Moses, by the way, that Moses was going to be on their behalf, bargaining for the people and reminding God of his promise. It was never that God forgot. It was that he was testing Moses right there. Okay, I'm going to test you. And he wasn't telling Moses, I'm going to destroy that nation and I'll make the promise through you, and you will be a great people. And Moses bargained for the people, saying, no, Lord, remember your promise to Abraham that you would make them a great nation. I know that they're very sinful and a very thick-headed people, but spare them, please, because there is a promise upon them. And God, again, there was times he was pushed. There's no doubt that he was definitely angry, but the people are definitely thick-headed. They were stubborn. They pissed God off on numerous occasions. And that was a big thing. They were never better than any other people. The only thing that they had above others is that they were chosen by God to fulfill a certain promise that would eventually lead into the lineage of David, which would lead to the lineage of Joseph in Bethlehem and giving birth to Jesus, so that salvation becomes apparent for everybody. And yes, God was the head cause of it. Yeah, absolutely. He is the author of salvation. Salvation happened in the perfect method, and these things, no matter good or evil, played into it. Like I was mentioning before, a divine drama. Wow, it is amazing to honestly think about. Let me move on, because I don't think there's really anything else I could cover in that comment. And I actually do... Okay. Ooh, I didn't read this. I'm so glad I did now. Okay, quote. And I actually do agree with you. Lucifer is the villain in that story, but what made him the villain was acting like God, for trying to stand atop another and using violence to force people under their feet. Jesus said, I won't stop until every stone is cast down from another. Well, God is a boulder on a mountain of stones, if it's real, of course. Unquote. I'll be 100% honest, I don't even know what you're referencing. For trying to stand atop another and using violence to... Okay, allow me to give you a base explanation, because this was the core of the previous video, and I think I need to reiterate anyway. Number one, God did not betray Lucifer, and God did not betray mankind by extension of that first point. He did not betray anybody. The betrayal happened by cause and effect of our disobedience, covering the people, and covering Lucifer. He was the one who broke apart. He sparked the idea in his heart of hearts. I want to be like God and have his worship. I can be like God. And again, whether or not God intentionally at that minute was like, be gone, or whether or not it just automatically happened because evil cannot exist in his presence, so therefore automatically he's just going to be cast down, it doesn't matter what the process was. Lucifer was the trigger to that effect. He was the trigger to the entire cataclysm that happened afterwards. He was responsible for his own thoughts, his own heart, and his own mind. And those that followed him in the Legion of Angels went with him because they followed him dearly and gave him what he wanted. He was allowed to do this because, again, it would lead to the author of salvation. It would lead to Jesus. It would lead to a beautiful divine drama playing out. We are the subjects of God. We are his creation, and he can do as he sees fit. When it comes to Lucifer, he is absolutely the villain of this story, because his heart of hearts is to weasel his way in. And I like this because I got it from a video. Someone made a very good comparison. Lucifer is like a guy at a pool party, and everybody's going to throw him into the pool. They grab him and they're going to throw him in the pool. So what was his logical conclusion? He's going to take as many people as he can with him. He doesn't desire followers. He knows his eternal fate. He knows it well and aware. I do believe that there is no instance in where he actually thinks he's better than God. He basically worked for the guy. He worked for God. He knows that God is infinite. So there's never really an instance, unless it's for our benefit, or in this instance, not our benefit, but if we were present, there would be plenty of times you would lie and whisper in our ear like, no, I am totally greater than God. But if it was just him and God in the room, it'd be like, oh, don't kill me, don't kill me. Like, I don't believe he's actually trash-talking God to his face in a one-on-one. Now, if we are present and witnessing, by all means he's going to fluff himself up, because he knows that God's not going to kill him until the way ends, so he gets to get away with it. What difference does it make? He's already going to the, what I would assume is the boiler room of hell. So the point is that his divine judgment's already there. What he did in the garden was unforgivable, but it was always his choice. And because of his choice, he is now given the absolute ultimate punishment for leading the creation and image of God astray. Now, we were still held responsible because we could have argued back and been like, no, but God said not to do that. But we didn't. We listened to the lies and thought, maybe there's something more outside of God. And lo and behold, there wasn't. So, when I say that Lucifer is definitely the villain of the story, we can agree on that because it's true. Lucifer benefits from lies. And I have seen the benefits of evil and self-reflection. In fact, actually, I'm going to make a video about this. The real religion of Lucifer is not Satanism, it's atheism, because that was the first lie he tempted mankind with. You will be like gods. Atheism's core thing is about you being your own god. Now, again, a subject for another video, but look at how his lie amplifies in today's culture, where atheism is one of the big, major counter-beliefs to Christianity. This is not coincidence. It reflects even today, and you could just observe it for yourself. More on that another time. I just don't know what you mean. I don't know exactly what you're referencing. But I'm assuming... I don't know what you're referencing, so I don't know how to argue against it, or even argue for it, if we're in agreement with it, ironically enough. So I'm going to say, if you could clarify that, if you are watching, clarify that one for me so that I can understand. Where did you get that information? I'll make a counterpoint to that one. Now, moving on to the second to last one, quote, maybe the Bible is different than yours, but mine says every time Moses came to reason with Pharaoh, oh, this is going back, he allowed Moses to take his people and leave, freeing them from their chains, metaphorically. Then God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Refer to above argument in this instance, unquote for a second. Refer to above instance because I don't want to prolong this video longer than it needs to be. So we already discussed, yes, God hardened his heart, but remember that the whole point was, no. You say you're God. We're going to continue this game. You're not going to bail out early. Or you're not clocking out early. You're going to suffer through all the things that I have planned because you brought it upon yourself. Back into the thing, quote, if it was Pharaoh's own cruelty and hardened his heart, then Pharaoh's is at the very least a god. I'll continue real quick. If it was God proving to Pharaoh that he had power over him, then God is cruel, which is a trait assigned with him often, and therefore not good. If he caused the suffering of thousands of unrelated civilians to prove a point, he's pretty petty and cruel. I'll admit the character of God changes drastically between the two testaments. However, the Old Testament God is definitely a figure to be feared, which is not good, LOL. Unquote. Not correct. Give me a second and I can explain it. So, to answer that, if it was Pharaoh's own cruelty that hardened his heart, then Pharaoh is at the very least a god. Incorrect. We have... Okay. A god, the definition of a god, not the actual El Elohim, Adonai, Jehovah, El Shaddai, whatever. Not talking about him. Any definition of a god is anything that you put above at the top station. The whole point of it being a god is that it's the top pinnacle point of your life. So you're right. He was at very least a god, but he had no power that wasn't given him already. The people of Egypt, his nation, already made him that. It was the structure of how everything was working. So you're absolutely right. And it was his own cruelty that eventually led into that. But remember, referred to above argument, God was prolonging it because a point needed to be proven. He was pretending to be God made flesh. And God needed to be like, okay, no, you don't get to bail out early. This needs to happen. There's purpose to it. It was always Pharaoh's cruelty because it was always in his heart. Think about that. It was like all he did was harden it, but it was already in his heart to commit the action of taking it back and being like, no, you can't go. If God was proving to Pharaoh that he had power over him, then God is cruel, which is a trait assigned to him often and therefore not good. Not correct. He needed to prove that he had power over him because it was a breaking of the ego. Notice that whenever you read about God in the Old Testament, yes, he is assigned to be cruel and feared. But the thing is, there's a reason that there is an emphasis on cruelty and fear. It's not to show that he's being cruel. First off, he's not cruel. He's just. He is a just judge, and when he brings judgment, he brings righteous judgment. You'll notice that little characteristical trait anytime you read the scripture. If you look verses above, there is always an atrocity or an evil committed before God takes a final stance judgment on said individual. There are instances like you've mentioned. When God does these things, it seems cruel, but you remember, we committed atrocities to deserve this cruelty, if you'll call it that. So we ultimately bring it upon ourselves because we have the power of choice. And at that point, salvation was not a thing for a lot of people. So unfortunately, a lot was done at that point that needed to be done for the end goal to happen. And a lot of these people brought it upon themselves because they were just godless in their heart of hearts. And they didn't adhere to the things that God gave. And I know there's a lot of arguments that can be made from that. I'm going to keep one subject at a time. But he is fundamentally good because he's the only one enforcing good. If it weren't for him enforcing good, there would only be evil left. And that's kind of like a key point. If he caused the suffering of... and he didn't cause the suffering of thousands of unrelated civilians to prove a point. And that's not necessarily petty. Again, it was always in Pharaoh's heart to do that. He just hardened it so that he became cruel again, and he acted upon the cruelty of his heart. He had the ability to make these punishments. The people suffered because they were part of the system of Egypt and its pantheon, and they encouraged the behavior and even inepted upon the thing of making Israel basically less than human. They were part of the problem. They weren't unrelated by any stretch. And again, we could talk about the children thing that I mentioned above, but the people, they were already godless. And if they were suffering as a result on the land of Egypt, that was not just to prove a point. It's not petty and cruel. They brought it upon themselves because they were part of the problem. And that is something that I constantly see in arguments, is like, we forget that we are held accountable for our actions. We are, totally and utterly. There is no disagreement there. We are held to our own standards here. We are held to what we need to be held. We have to be held accountable in some way. And that is why God's judgment matters so much in a lot of these instances. Because it's not just about us being judged like unrighteously. It's for cruelty's sake. It's being held accountable for what we did. And the people were part of the problem. And then being feared. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One brings understanding. We fear God because the best way that I could put it is that do not fear the one who can take your body, fear the one who can destroy your soul or spirit. Is that a good rough parallel, baby? The wife is going to find the direct quote for me, but the point still stands. He is the reason we fear him is the same way that a son or a daughter fears their father. I can tell you, as a son to a man, I love my dad, but I always had a fear of him. Not because I was afraid of him, like, oh God, I'm afraid of my dad. No, because I loved him too much and I didn't want to hurt him, and I was afraid of many times that I would hurt him, many times that he would, have to punish me and how I would be held accountable and so on and so forth. I feared my father because I respected him. I feared my father because I loved him. I feared my father because that's a fundamental part of respect, a fundamental part of obedience. If you do not love and respect someone and fear them on that fundamental level, there is none of that.
Do you have a give your Bible with you?
I do. Right here.
Matthew 10:28. You got one reading
Matthew
concept.
10:28. Thank you for that. Matthew 12. I almost hit it. 10:28. Okay, here we go. This is talking about the 12 being encouraged. And fear not them which kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but rather fear him, God, which is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a farthing, and one of them shall not fall on the ground without your Father? But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Now that's a very weird... Fear you not, therefore, you are more value than many sparrows. Okay, I see that. Okay, the context here is like you fear God, but fear not because he values you. Be afraid in the instance that you need to fear and respect God. Not in the instance that you should, like he's a cruel man. Like, no, fear him because he's your father. Fear him because he's your creator. He could destroy at any point, but he chooses to place value in you. He chooses your value. And he has already, as of this moment, past, present, future, deemed you worthy. And that is the biggest thing that a lot of people they gloss over. I don't know how to fundamentally argue this point, but no, he's not... I don't know how to further emphasize it. I think I emphasized it enough. But the core point is that yes, you are to fear God to a certain extent, but not in the world's definition of fear of like cowering in a corner because you don't want any part of him, but fear him because you love and respect him and because he is your creator. But be confident that he places value in you enough to want you to be his son, to be his daughter, whoever you are. There is love. And that is the most important part, that there is love. There is a certain respect that needs to be had, but there is love underneath all of it. And love is truly the core of it. Last comment right here that he put, quote, as far as I'm concerned, if there is an all-powerful, omnipresent, I totally read that wrong, omnipresent, omnipotent being, and he's not morally good, he's not worthy of worship, unquote. I'll quickly agree. If there is an all-powerful being and he's not morally good, you would be right, he's not worthy of worship. But that's why there's stock in Jehovah, the Ancient of Days, El Elohim, El Shaddai, Adonai. That is the reason why there's stock in him. Because there's an entire nation of people that specifically can attest to that within the Bible, and the prophets that have served him ever so faithfully. He spoke to them and gave them his instruction, gave them his words, and they followed him and saw it firsthand account witnessing. There is one who is worthy of worship because he is fundamentally good of his nature. I'll continue real quick. Quote, I don't believe power is what determines what's right or good, unquote. Correct. It's not by power. It's not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord, which is again another fundamental truth of his very nature being good. Quote again, I believe using power to create suffering is worse than not using that power at all to prove that suffering. A God worthy of worship must necessarily be good, not necessarily powerful, unquote. Absolutely correct. Again, not about power. Now, again, it's not that he's creating suffering. The system of the world needs to be in place. The Chosen put out a pretty good example when he was, in fact, actually, we just watched the episode. I don't know, a lot of people are controversial on that, but here's the bare bones argument. He was talking to a crippled man, and they were asking during that episode, season 2, episode 1, I believe, and the man had a crippled leg, and they were asking, like, when is this salvation, and when is the kingdom of God supposed to come? And he's like, it will come soon, like, where there will be a time where there will be no more suffering, no more sighing, no more broken bodies, no nothing. But for right now, this is where you are. You are in a world where bones will break and wounds will be made and everything will take time to heal and all that, but be of good courage, because and then I'm paraphrasing heavily, by the way, but the point still stands. We are in this world where suffering is part of our inherent nature. God is not the direct cause of all of our suffering, because we are sinful by nature and bring that upon ourselves with or without him. He fundamentally wants us to follow him, and when we are in line with him and his will, there is nothing but good that can await us. Yes, there might be times where our faith will be tested, but that is the purpose of a test, is to bring out its full potential, to see what it is that it can do. And that's the beauty of it, when you see the grand perspective of how this divine drama brings out. It's so much. Honestly, I'm at a loss for words. It is just beautiful. I see it for what it is, because I can understand this, and I know a lot of people just don't understand this, and that's really just the disconnect that I can't really make for you. I can't make it any more obvious. I can't make it any more clear, and I wish I could. I truly wish I could. If I could, I would transfer my knowledge and my understanding to others so that they could see what I see. But that is not the point. You don't have to see how I see. When you start to let it for yourself, when you start to reach for the Father and say, let me see through your eyes, you will see the things you need to see. But it comes with submission. It comes with time. It comes with wanting a relationship with your Creator, and he will give you the vision. I'm not trying to teach a prosperity gospel. I don't believe in that. I don't care about that. At the end of the day, I just want you to know your Heavenly Father. I want you to know my Father, our Father. And when it comes to this relationship, it's just such a beautiful thing. I cannot begin to describe it, no matter how many words I use. And in fact, I'm just rambling, and that's half the problem. It is such a beautiful thing, and I wish that I could just transfer everything that I know into this. But I simply can't, because that is our disconnect through this vessel of sin, of flesh, of finite ability. I can't do that. But there is one who can. And if you just give him the chance, sincerely give him the chance, you will have the answers you seek. You will see him the same way that I see him. Give him the chance to prove himself by his... You're right. You said it at the beginning, my good sir, who I will remain again unmentioned, or even good madam. I actually don't know who you are. So I don't know who you are, who you identify as. That's you. But you said it yourself. You engage the Bible on its merits. It is the inspired word of God by absolute merit. You should be doing that. You should be judging it by its own merits, and it's able to stand on its own 2 feet. We are here. It is there for our edification, there for our I don't even know the word to use it, our elevation, to bring us closer to God. If you read it for its true context and in submission, you will see for yourself, should you give it the real chance. I'm not telling you to accept religion. I'm not telling you to accept Baptist, Protestant, Catholic, Pentecostal, the oxymoronic, what's the word I'm looking for? What was the name of that liberal Christianity? The one that's oxymoron. Oh my God, we're running a blank here. That's a bad thing. That's a bad sign. Okay, the point stands. You heard the other ones. I'm gonna stop before I take up more time. But the point stands. I'm not trying to teach you a religion. I'm not trying to bring you closer to a belief system. I'm not trying to bring you on blind faith. That is what denominational will... I don't remember the name of the doctrine either, honestly.
Yeah. We're not offering doctrine.
Yeah, we're not offering... I'm not offering doctrine. My wife will never offer doctrine. We're not offering doctrine. I'm offering you a sincere relationship with one who knows you better than anyone, because he fundamentally created you. And at the end of the day, that's all that really matters. My good sir or madam, whoever you are, that left all these comments, thank you sincerely for giving me a topic of discussion. And I hope, honestly, even if it didn't convince you now, I hope that this gives you something to think on, and hopefully we can go back and forth. Even if it does nothing, I'm glad to have talked with you about it on such a civil level. It was awesome. And you know what? An entire hour and 10 minutes worth. Well worth. I loved it. So thank you for watching. I'll see you guys next time on the YouTube. Take care.